Good afternoon. Don needs to be acknowledged and credited with putting together today's program at such short notice. As you know, the legislature is voting today on a budget, and last Thursday we got a call from one of the three panelists we were to have, the two local senators and Jeff Morris out of Anacortes, to say that it's going to come together and they can't make it. And so we chatted, and Don made some calls, and today's panel is the result. So thanks very much, Don. It's a great job. Our format today is going to be really quite simple, I hope. We're going to have our three candidates, and each one of them will come here first, and we've asked them to give a short introduction as to why they're running, maybe 4 minutes or 5 minutes. After all three do that, they'll ascend the stage. I'll ask some questions, the same question of each one. They'll have 90 seconds to respond, and then after they respond, if they want to comment on what they've just heard or ask a question of another panelist or candidate, they may. When that process is done, we'll go on to the next question and then the next question. And probably at that time will be time to turn it over to you to ask your questions. Skip and Angie, the president and vice president of the organization, will be wandering the hall. We'll have the microphones. So that's our format. And we didn't talk about who the three of you would begin. No one volunteers. So we'll start with our current mayor, Dan Pike. We'll go to Kelli and then Clayton. So welcome, Dan.
Thanks. Well, thanks for everybody for showing up for this. This is part of why this is a job that I love and a community that I love being mayor of, is because I have the best job probably in the world because I live in a fantastic community filled with engaged people that continually are thinking about what they can do to make it better. And for the last 3+ years, I viewed my job as working with the great team that we've got at City Hall to continue the good, important foundations that were laid before me, to work with, to preserve what's good and try to make better the things that aren't as good as we'd like to have them be. I'm privileged to serve in a community that gets it. This is one of only 5 communities statewide that in November of 2010 passed a tax. And it was a tax that I pushed. The city council approved it on successive 4-3 votes, putting it to the voters. And it was a tax that was important because what it did is it enabled us to return, starting June 12th, Sunday transit service, as well as being proactive and bootstrapping ourselves, taking care of our infrastructure, providing more choices for transportation. It's the sort of thing that a lot of communities, a lot of people would shy away from thinking about in a really down time, but it's exactly the right time to think about it. And all I did was propose the idea. You guys voted it, and you voted it strongly. It was over 58% supported it. And it's things like that that have made managing the city's economy, the city's situation in the most challenging economic environment in the last 75 years turn out as well as it has. If you look around the city, if you look around the county, the country, the state, you'll see that we're in a position that most communities envy. We've got a budget that we've got good reserves for. We've managed to operate on a sustainable basis. We've managed to maintain our core capacities while honoring our core values. We've improved services, from building services to developing or initiating an Office of Business Relations and Economic Development so that business opportunities, businesses that want to be here, expand here, can be here, and not slip through the cracks. As a result of the management that we've instituted at City Hall, we got a credit upgrade this year about a week or so before they downgraded the U.S. So at this point, investors know that Bellingham is a better bet than the countries of Japan or China, from an investment grade perspective. And really that just is reflective of the triple bottom line management that we put in place at the city, that you've got a great staff up and down the line implementing, paying attention to. We've also been working to protect the specialists of Bellingham, ranging from paying attention to Lake Whatcom, trying to address the very real challenges that are there. Under this administration, we've spent as much in terms of resources as the prior administrations combined. We've put more staff into it. We've been looking for solutions. We've been finding some, but it's a challenging problem, and we'll continue working on it going forward. We're also trying to make sure that we maintain the very high-quality parks and recreation and library facilities that we have, the cultural amenities that we have in this community, so that everyone has those accessible to them. It's one of the things that makes this a special place. It's also an important economic development component because companies that we want here want to be in communities like ours. They want to be in places that honor those sorts of values. We also are working to leverage the opportunities to climb out of the recession locally. You know, when you look at the waterfront, it's kind of like a body of water. You may not see much going on at the surface, and like all of you, I'm sure, I'm somewhat frustrated at the pace of change, but I can tell you that change is happening and it's real. By the end of this month, we'll go to bid, for example, on the reconstruction of Central Avenue. Those bids will close by the end of June. That construction will happen this year. And that's a critical step so that we can load the waterfront for development down the line. We're also working very closely with the port to tie infrastructure provision with cleanup. And the port's leading the way on cleanup, and so we want to make sure that as the cleanup happens, we put the infrastructure in place, but we don't spend millions of dollars on infrastructure, 5 or 10 years before there's a cleanup that's going to entice development. I also am trying to work on leveraging the intellectual capital that Western provides. So, for example, when I look at the opportunities for creating biogas or other qualities out of manure in this county, and I find out that the VRI is short just a little bit of money, I talk to Mark Asmundson and say, is this the kind of project that you might be able to support with some of the funds that are coming to you from the BP cleanup? And he said, yeah, that sounds like a very good fit for what we're trying to do. So trying to marry those opportunities together so that some of the intellectual capital that happens actually comes back and creates jobs in this community. Just really briefly touching on the challenges facing us, really it's the economy. It's the economy and jobs. There's going to be more layoffs probably coming in public sector in the months and the next couple of years, especially as the state just talked about what they're doing. Dr. Arun Raha said that the next 3 years are going to be challenging the way the past several have been. And so it's a time to maintain the kind of management that we've had in the last 3 years. It's a time to make sure that we maintain the foundation, build reasonably, maintain a position of fiscal responsibility going forward. Thank you.
Next is Kelli Linville.
My name is Kelli Linville, and I want to be your mayor. I really do. I was born in Whatcom County. I grew up here. I raised my family here, and I love this place. It means a lot to me. And I believe that Bellingham is the crown jewel in Washington State. And I can say that because I've seen other people who think that they're the crown jewels. We are an innovative city with cutting-edge ideas, and we should expect better results for the energy of the people, for the investments that we can make, and for the services that city government should provide. My belief is that you have to empower citizens from the neighborhood up in order to assess what cities need and to make sure that your resources are allocated fairly, appropriately, and in a priority manner. I don't assume to know all the answers. I don't assume to know all the issues. But I know how to find out because I want to work with every single citizen to make them feel that they are really a part of city government. City government needs to be we. City government can't be I. So, having said that, what would I bring to the table? Well, first of all, I bring 17 years of serving this community. I would bring the experience of balancing a $34 billion budget. Didn't stay balanced very long. There happened to be this thing called the recession that jumped in the first year that I was doing that, and I can understand the stress and the pressure that Mayor Pike has been under, because these are not good times. But I believe that we need to build that foundation, our infrastructure, our mandated public services for health and safety, our planning requirements, so that we have a vision for what we want our city, our waterfront, our community to look like in the next 50 years. I've had a lot of experience in bringing diverse people together and coming up with solutions that might not be the first two solutions that were identified, but were ones that will meet the interest of many people. There are people in this room who are involved and educated and caring about the city of Bellingham. There are many, many, many more people who aren't in this room, who don't come to the meetings, who don't have somebody representing their interests. And we have to make sure that our neighborhoods is how we find out those people that are not really expressing their voice. We need to respect the public processes that have gone on through the last several administrations for the waterfront, for Lake Whatcom, for our library. And if we don't think that that's the right way to go, then we need to re-engage the public to find out how those things should be changed, because individuals in our community invested time and energy to come up with what their vision was. I definitely agree with the mayor's triple bottom line. I think that's a very important thing to consider every decision you make. But in reality, a triple bottom line is not effective if it doesn't come as part of a vision. Every single person at all these tables could have a very good idea, something that they believe would make Bellingham better. In a time of limited resources, we need to make sure that when we do make a decision to expand and expend resources, that we're doing it in something that meets our long-term goals. It's why I'm a little concerned about building a street into the waterfront before really reviewing those plans and making sure that what we were planning to do 4 years ago, we're still planning to do now. That's a big investment and a big expense. So in closing, I want to leave more time for questions than talking. I would be honored to represent this city. I would be honored to work with every single individual that wants to make Bellingham the best place to live it can possibly be. And I want to bring respect, relationships, and results to City Hall. Thank you very much.
Our third candidate is Clayton Petree. So, Clayton.
Well, thank you to the City Club for inviting me to come participate today. And I want to tell you a little bit about myself and why I've decided to run. As I've participated in various local government processes, it seems like there's been a downward trend in public participation. There used to be packed council meetings, and it just seems to have really died off over the last 5 years. People tell me things like, I don't really feel like what I say is heard, or they've already made up their mind. But it wasn't just that. The port, the county, the small cities, and Bellingham haven't been working together as well as they used to. And it's rarely the county, small cities, and port you see fighting with each other. The lack of cooperation is something that's unacceptable to me, and I think it does a lot of damage to the community and our goals. At first I thought about running for city council, but after reviewing my professional and life tool set, I decided that my skills would be better utilized at the administrative level. My university studies were designed to prepare me for management of people and products in technical fields. I've had to make payroll, run and improve production lines, hire, lay off, discipline employees. I've been responsible for research and development that produces tens of millions of dollars for the companies I've worked at. And these are all real-world management skills that I would apply to efficiently deliver city services to the citizens of Bellingham. And you might wonder what's Clayton about? Well, number one, you aren't the pesky public that one has to deal with. Public interaction should be welcome and encouraged. As far as the budget goes, I think it's in worse condition than it appears on paper. We need to focus more on needs first and wants second. There are some tremendously expensive items that the city should address that you may not know about. We aren't adequately maintaining our city assets, roads and buildings that we're maybe delaying some of the work on. Those are budgetary needs. You should always have a plan to take care of those. Going to bid to start the first road project leading to the waterfront. I think until the plan's adopted and we know what's going to happen, I think it's fiscally irresponsible to begin that right now. Signing open-ended contracts to spend unknown amounts, but potentially tens of thousands of dollars, fighting with the county over coffee shop drive-throughs that can't be built now anyways, when we're dipping into reserves, and we can't, and while we can't afford to maintain our police level of service, it's just a poor prioritization of taxpayer money, in my opinion. Bellingham needs to focus on basic city needs that keep our city maintained and attractive. Whether it's proper budgeting for maintenance and improvements to our buildings, or proper budgeting to maintain our safety services or city parkland. Jobs. Bellingham must work hard to increase employment opportunity in Bellingham. I think we're all three of us will say that. This means maintaining the quality of life for those living here now and welcoming newcomers who add to our economic base. Making it as easy for jalapenos to thrive is just as important as making it a smooth, efficient process for the home-based Toys R Us Good Guys area to redevelop. There's identified shortfalls to our jobs land supply that we need to address now so that when America's rebuilding, Bellingham is at the same time. Bellingham took the lake. Everybody talks about the lake. I've heard about it all my life. Bellingham took the Watershed Acquisition Fund and they spent it all at a time when we got the least amount we could for our money. We're still paying the debt and now we're thinking about asking for more. We should be spending money like that as it's received, year by year, instead of rushing along and paying a significant amount on interest. Instead of unilaterally asking Ecology to take action against the county, we should be taking our issues to the Lake Whatcom Cooperative Management Group. After all, the county controls most of the watershed. We should concentrate our efforts on identified city pollution sources. I have heard politicians talk about the lake since I was a kid, and I just can't believe that we're addressing our own pollution sources with some of the projects that are going on right now. I don't feel like Bellingham is quite the family-friendly place it was 15 or so years ago. And I'm running because I'd like to get Bellingham focused on these things that I think are important. Thank you.
Okay, now the questions, a few from me and then a number from you. So we'll start with, just go down, we'll start with Kelli, then Clayton can respond, then Dan, and then we'll change the order for the second question. Kelli, it's been 10 years, or all three of you, it's been 10 years since Georgia Pacific closed its pulp mill. And since then, there have been a great deal of talk about what to do with the property. What next steps should the city of Bellingham take to redevelop the downtown waterfront area?
Well, the first thing, am I on?
I hope so. You should be. All right, let me take it out.
Take it out. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, the very first thing that should be done immediately, I believe, is to look at the visioning plan that was put together by countless citizens over countless hours. I can't even remember if it was 4, 5, or 6 years ago, and on a time frame. So we're not just talking about it forever and ever. We need to make sure that what we envisioned then is practical now. We may have some different economic situations. We may have some different environmental concerns that we may not have had before. We may have different opportunities than what we had before. But I think it's very important that the port and the city, who are the partners in this, reconvene a group to review that plan and start making either adjustments or implementations as we can afford to.
Thank you. 90 seconds for Clayton.
Okay, well, I think that the first thing we need to do is finish the plan. I've heard people tell me that they don't necessarily agree with how it's being proposed right now. I'd like to see a little bit more public review, and we need to. There's been a lot of fighting with the port in the past. I think if we work a little bit more cooperatively with them, I think we can get the plan finished, we can get the cleanup started, and then we can start improving access to the waterfront and encouraging development there. In addition to that, I think that we need to figure out a way to make development at Old Town profitable. If you look at the financial study for Old Town, developers aren't going to build there because they can't make money. A lot of it requires cleanup as well, or special disposal of when you dig. And until we can get those two plans synchronized, I don't think that we're going to see very much go on in either site.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. First, I'd like to say that we have had a lot of visioning. There will be a lot of process going forward. I was glad to hear Clayton mention that we need to move on with getting a plan delivered, because there is a plan that's going to be delivered to the commission, to the planning commission, and to the city council sometime in the next few months. I would also like to point out that sometimes you have to have faith and vision to move forward. And so we are moving forward with the implementation of the access at Central Street, because in every analysis that's been looked at, in every public vision, that project is a key piece to being able to move forward. And I don't want to wait 3 years and then the economy is rebounding, and then we have to go through a 2 or 3 year building process before we can accept new development and lose the jobs, lose the business opportunities there. We will have a lot of process going forward. That's something the city has been very committed to. The city and port are working very closely together on the waterfront redevelopment at this point, and I think that we've got a great, I think the port made a great hire in the new executive director, who gets both this city's heritage and the opportunities going forward from both new businesses and from things like our fishing industry. So I want you to be optimistic. I think there's a lot going on. There's going to be a lot unfolding on the waterfront in the months ahead. And restarting is a way to delay everything.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Now, if any of you, either of you, some of you, would like to ask a question of the others on this topic? Now's the time. Go ahead.
Well, it's my understanding that the plan that is proposed to go forward to the Planning Commission was available to go forward last October. So maybe we could discuss why that didn't happen.
Sure. Actually, it wasn't available to go forward last October because there's a number of differences in perspective between the city and the port in terms of what's important, what we need to have at the end of the day in the plan, what their have-to-haves are, what the city's have-to-haves are. And as happens with any process, there's a negotiation that's involved with that. So there have been negotiations involved with that. There's been reporting on that, and that is happening now, and it's happening in a timely manner.
Clayton, do you have a question of either? Dan, do you have a question?
Nope.
So my second question is, what concerns, if any, do you have with the proposed Cherry Point Cargo Terminal and Pier project?
Gosh, I thought you were...
That, if approved, may well result in numerous coal trains daily passing back and forth along our waterfront. So the question is, what concerns, if any, do you have? And we'll start with Clayton. You're a lucky guy to get them.
Okay. I definitely have concerns with the proposal as it's been presented so far. I have a position paper that I've written, and you can find a link on my Facebook page / Clayton for Mayor. But the main issue I have is this is a really unique area. There's just one of them. It's a special designation done through the Growth Management Act, and it involves a private landowner with their private property utilizing a public resource, which is the waterway. So we should have input as to how this special area is used. Now, maybe they just say, I don't wanna, and they can push forward with their project as it is. We need to look at things like, is this the right place for a coal port? It's hundreds of miles further away from the source than if they were to go through with the port in Vancouver. Every single day, if you have 9 full trains and 9 empty trains going back and forth, it adds up to, so many miles each year of unnecessary travel through a myriad of cities. I think that needs to be analyzed, and all of that extra pollution needs to be mitigated. Not just pollution in Bellingham, and not just in Whatcom County, but the decision to bring it up here. The entire extra length needs to be mitigated and looked at very carefully, because it affects millions of people along the way. And that's it.
Thank you very much. Dan?
Well, I think my job first and foremost is to protect Bellingham. That's the mayor's job. And so I'm concerned about a proposal that I think is under a lot of pressure to get approval without full examination. I think we need a full study of the impacts and benefits to make the right choice about what we should do. I think Bellingham has legitimate concerns that must be heard and studied. I'm concerned about the impacts to the waterfront redevelopment if we have the increase in train activity that's being talked about. So we need to look at those and see what that does and how it can be mitigated, if it can be mitigated, because the waterfront long term will produce over 10,000 jobs, and the GPT terminal is going to produce several hundred jobs that are permanent. I also don't want to have us sacrifice a sustainable fishing industry for 40 years of trains. If both can be accommodated, then it needs to be shown by the proponents how that's going to happen. I'd also like to see them acting the way BP is acting, where BP is putting training in place at our local community colleges for the jobs that they're going to undertake with the expansion of the refinery over the same time frame. I'd like to see those sorts of programs in place for that terminal, if that terminal is coming forward, so that we know that the jobs that are being produced are going to be filled locally. Otherwise, what good does it do us as a community? So I want a full analysis of the Gateway Pacific Terminal costs, not just those costs at Cherry Point. I want them to look at Bellingham, look at what it does to this community, and provide us some assurance of how that's going to be addressed and who's going to pay for it.
Good, thank you. Good in terms of you're right on time.
You're not giving a
I
value.
was hoping you were
Not a value
editorializing.
judgment, that's right. Kelli, you're next.
Well, first of all, this is a project that started in Washington, D.C., and it's going to Beijing. And I think we need to be very clear about what the policies are that are driving exporting a non-renewable resource from the United States to China. One that will be burned, and the drift will come back to us. And we need to make sure that this is the right cargo to be shipped. Having said that, I've worked for 15 years to get an environmentally sound last pier at Cherry Point. That is part of our comprehensive plan. It's something that was done when my husband was on the county council, and we've had good cooperation with state agencies on that. I've called the governor's office. I've said the EIS needs to include not just Bellingham, but East County, because I think there was a suggestion that we'll just send the trains to East County. I don't think that really addresses should we be exporting coal. And secondly, I think we need to understand that it's not just Bellingham. It's it's everybody. My husband and I, for 28 years, have lived within, I thought it was 100 yards. He told me it's 75 yards. So it's closer than I thought, to the train traffic going by our house. So we experience what the level of trains are now, and we're very realistic on the fact that we bought our house when the trains were already there, and the airplanes. So I think that having the EIS, getting all the information first, is going to tell us whether the cost benefit, both to the environment and the economy, is worth this development, and that's what I'll wait to do.
Okay, thank you. Our third question, we'll start with Dan, and then Clayton and Kelly. Recent monitoring reports show that water quality in Lake Whatcom, our drinking water supply, continues to decline. What is your plan to clean up the lake's water to meet the state's mandated water quality standards?
Well, I'm working on a number of things that I intend to continue and expand on. One is, one of the complaints that I heard was that I'm not working with the county as well as I could on that. And frankly, the county has been willing to do things that I think have been damaging to the lake. And I will say that when it's a situation where we're not getting cooperation on something that's important to this community, I'm going to stand up for Bellingham, because that's my job. So I stood up and I put forward a proposal. I worked with the Department of Ecology for a long time, and they were in lockstep with the city, and then at the last minute they got cold feet on removing the exempt well opportunities for additional building in the Lake Whatcom watershed. We are moving forward on identifying what will work in terms of filters for our own stormwater runoff from city facilities. We're working with neighborhoods about how they can infiltrate on site in their homes. And partly Edison said that he tried 99 different filaments and they didn't work. And somebody said, "You failed 99 times?" He said, "No, I discovered 99 ways that you didn't want to make a filament." The same thing is true, unfortunately, when you're at the cutting edge of filtering phosphorus from runoff. We've been the first ones working on this issue on such a scale. So we started off getting maybe a 30% removal, which was unacceptable. But through working at it, we're now getting over 70%. And if we continue working on it, which we will, eventually those will be very meaningful removal opportunities that will help us turn the tide, because we have to deal with the built environment as well as stopping additional construction until it's done in such a way that it does no more damage to the lake.
Thank you. Clayton.
Okay, I mentioned earlier when I spoke before that I agree that the projects that they begin working on are the number one thing that Bellingham should be working on. We need to stop polluting the lake ourselves first, and then work on maybe doing some projects out in the county or annexing some of the UGA that is next to the lake, so that we can do those projects while they're in the city as well. They've cleaned up other lakes simply by getting everybody around the lake on sewer and water. Working with the county, I think we might be able to do something like that. I know the city doesn't necessarily want to serve and encourage people to build any more homes out there, but there's a lot of homes out there right now that are on septic, and there's even some that still direct draw, if you can believe that. And those need to be on sewer and water at some point in the future. I don't think it would be in the next 4 years or 8 years. Maybe it could, but I think we need to really take care of our pollution first, and continue working with Whatcom County to reduce the pollution that they put into the lake.
Thank you, Kelly.
Well, 18 years ago was the first time I really understood that our drinking water source was in jeopardy. And the legislature, working with local community members and with the lead of Senator Spinell, she says, say former Senator Spinell, but she'll always be Senator to me, passed the Lake Whatcom Management Plan that at least identified what the sources of pollution into the lake were, and said that because it's a drinking water source, it has to have a special plan that will protect it for generations. We have been working on this for many years. It is time that we actually see results. When we put together a zero discharge plan for the Nooksack River, within 1 year, we saw significant reduction in phosphorus, in fecal coliform, and in several other pollutants that were running into the river. And the cost-effective way we did it is, instead of only buying large tracts of land, we said you have to have functioning buffers where the development is around the lake. That will keep a lot of pollutants from running into the lake. I think it's also important to understand that when we can't continue to blame other people for why we're not making progress. I think that Bellingham can be the adult in the room, and we can hold each other and others accountable for making sure that we're not blaming, but we're actually progressing in protecting the lake. And that means holding people accountable publicly for things that they're doing that are not benefiting the cleanup of Lake Whatcom. So I would say that we make the most cost-effective investments possible that will bring us the biggest results, and we focus not only on what other people are doing, but we take responsibility for the part that we have control over, and that's the developed property within the watershed.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any comment or response back? Kelly, do you? No? Okay, thank you. The last question I'll ask is, and we'll start with you.
Okay.
All right, good deal. You've probably heard that these are tough economic times. What principles and methods would you use to set priorities and make cuts and/or raise new revenue?
Well, I think we usually talk about we're going to have to cut or we're going to have to raise taxes. And one of the things that I think is very important, especially if you wander through downtown Bellingham, is we have to retain our local businesses, we have to help them grow, and then we need to attract new businesses to this wonderful place to live. There is no reason we have to sell our community short because people want to come here. So I think that having three legs of the stool and only two are one. Secondly, it's looking at the fiscal plan that the city also already put together. We need to know what we are required to do by federal or state law. We need those things we can't change. We need to know what we're required to do through ordinances or council initiatives. Those things we can change. We need to make sure that the foundation of our city is sound, not just our capital budget bond rating, but our actual operating budget, for which I have many concerns that we've lived off our reserves, and next year the grocery store's closed, and we're going to have to figure out what we're going to do. So prioritizing, making sure we're doing performance-based budgeting, making sure we're taking care of our foundation first, and then asking the public what else they'd like to participate in if we want the shiny new ideas that most people would like to see the city invest in, and they're important.
Thank you. Clayton?
Well, I think the most important thing is to go through and make sure that our core city services are properly funded. Public safety, your firemen, policemen, streets, our buildings that Bellingham owns, all those kinds of things need to be in the budget. The maintenance for them needs to be in there, and not all of that's in there right now. After you figure out your needs, then you talk about your wants. Do we want to build a road down to the waterfront first, or do we want to buy, do we want to do some other project in Old Town first? Where are we going to spend excess money on wants? Do we want to build a big library somewhere that we maybe couldn't necessarily afford just based off of our current income? Things like that. So I guess the first thing that I plan to do is talk to all of the department heads, see what they feel the needs are, review that, talk to the city council, talk to the finance department, and see what their views are, and go from there.
I think you start by looking at the problem and making sure that everybody in the city is engaged in it, everybody working for the city is engaged in it. And in fact, that's what we've done. So, for example, 2 years ago, when this started unfolding, we were negotiating with the firefighters. And I went and I talked to them, their chief talked to them. We explained what the situation was. And we said there are only a couple of different options that we can undertake. One is we can cut through laying people off. The other is that you can make a choice to accept less than you would get in better times and to give us some changes. And to their credit, they did that. They saved us. They gave us a 0% contract. They made rules changes that collectively those two things saved us $750,000 a year. And we had other cities saying, how did you do that? And it was because we communicated, we worked as a team. Just this week, I'm pleased to say that our second largest union, S&P, signed a similar cost-saving contract. It saved us over $1 million compared to what we might have expected, where they're taking 0% this year. They're giving us health and benefits changes that will save us a ton of money because we're all in this together. And that's how we need to work on it. I'm glad to hear that Clayton would talk to finance and the other departments. In fact, that's what we've been doing. We put together a plan looking at what our needs are and how we need to address those going forward. So, for example, we identified a lot of substandard heating and heat HVAC systems, which isn't very sexy, but we went to a bond to replace them so that we lower both our greenhouse gas footprint and we also lower a lot of our energy costs that we have as a community. That's one of the areas where that improved S&P bond rating is going to save us money. As we pay that bond back, we're paying less than if we hadn't had those conversations, if I hadn't talked to our finance director, if I hadn't talked to our chief administrative officer, if we hadn't worked together with the council to put in place policies that deliver. And that's what we've done, and that's what we'll continue doing going forward.
Thank you. Do either one of you have questions of the other? And absent that, let's go to our audience, Skip and Angie.
Over here?
Identify yourself to, okay, and Angie, there's one here and
Excuse
back
me.
there. And the basic ground rules are badge wearing, members, no speeches,
Sorry, Clayton, you can ask
good questions, and I'll
be
judge
next
whether
up.
it's good or not.
Kelly, you and I can ask questions, but Clayton can't.
I have a question for the mayor and the other two candidates. I was wondering what the status of the negotiations on Chestnut Ridge is, and I would like the other two candidates to let me know if they would support the city's purchase of Chestnut Ridge.
So the status is right now it's in court because it went into bankruptcy. There's a dispute between the bank and one of the owners about the disposition of the property. We do have, in effect, we had a deal in place with the bank to purchase the property. As soon as the court issues are cleared, then we intend to move forward with that. But we intend to move forward in a way that does not compromise any Greenways funds that have already been tied to other purposes, for example, in the South Side Plan.
Well, that's a touchy question. We're talking about $110,000 an acre. We're rewarding a couple of neighborhoods for fighting zoning that was in place. It's very different from the DOT site where that they just addressed that where somebody was asking for an upzone. This is something that that developer and those partners when they bought the property they had the zoning in place. I'm not sure that I support buying the entire piece of property as is being proposed right now. Maybe with the extra time from the court case, there can be some sort of compromise purchase, some sort of different purchase that isn't so expensive, and maybe that the neighborhoods in the area might accept. I've talked to some of the people that live in that area, and I know that at least some of the ones that keep track of that area believe that there can be some development in responsible parts of that piece of property.
I believe that that if the city believed after the original zoning that there shouldn't have been development there, that the city needed to intervene early. We do down zones around here. They're not popular, and they make people unhappy, but we do those. Having said that, I think the main thing now as we go forward is that the price that the city would pay for that property needs to be just, and it needs to be based on an evaluation and assessment. And I was very disturbed to see the $8 million figure thrown out in the newspaper before the property was even in foreclosure, because we do need to make sure that we're not paying more for a property than what we believe it's worth. And having said that, I think there needs to be a very big negotiation because when I was growing up, that was called the tar pit or bogey field, or I'm probably making this up, but it's where you went instead of the Moonlight Theater, if anybody you know what that meant. But so this is probably not the most appropriate place to build all those houses. On the other hand, there may be some compromise that can come about so that we're not overpaying for something, but we're still building in the appropriate place. And I think that's the most important thing, is to not shortchange the citizens by promising something before we even know what the last appraisal actually was as far as cost.
Thank you. Skip?
This is for Clayton Petree. You said that Bellingham is less family friendly than it used to be. Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. I don't know if you know this, but I grew up here, and when I had to leave to get a job after I graduated from Western. When I came back, I bought a house for something like $85,000. It was a small house on F Street, and next to me were some families, and they had purchased those homes. They weren't renting. Today, housing in Bellingham is out of control expensive. We've constricted family-style housing so much that the price for family-style housing is just, it's incredibly expensive. It's not family-friendly. Most people, not just in Whatcom County, but people growing up in Bellingham, they're not going to be able to afford to live in the city. So they're moving out to areas where you do see lots of families. Birch Bay, Sudden Valley in our watershed, areas like that. There's also been an increase in gang kind of activity and a decrease in police level of service. And we're only planning for about another officer per 5,000 new people here. That's going to lower our level of service even further and make it more difficult to keep Bellingham family friendly.
Thank you. Other comments, responses?
Yeah, I just want to respond to some inaccurate information that Mr. Petree offered. In fact, the caseload per officer for the police right now is lower than it was when I took office, significantly lower. The crime rates have gone down. In fact, that relates to the fact that we have a very good police force. And the only department that has not suffered any cuts, their total department budget has gone up every year, is the police. Every other department in the city has undergone cuts. So if you want to suggest that you want to add police, tell me what else you want to cut. But I would say that we do have a family-friendly emphasis, and that's, again, this is related to the triple bottom line approach. When we made cuts, we looked at the partnerships we have with nonprofits as well. And so we worked to maintain that capacity. A lot of those nonprofits on the county side of the street, they decided that things were so bad they had to cut all their external spending. We started out with 90% of the level that they were already getting, because it's important that in times like this, that the Opportunity Council is still functioning, that the food bank is still doing what they're doing, that Sustainable Connections is still helping build vibrant local businesses. And so we maintained that. And all of that helps build a family-friendly community. And I'd also say that one of the few positives out of the current economy is it is becoming more affordable to live in Bellingham.
Kelli, do you have a response?
Well, since my son just moved out by BP, I don't think he thinks he thinks so. Because the comment was made that crime rates are going down, first of all, I'd say, well, then we should keep doing what we're doing. But when we only have 4 people on duty between 3 o'clock in the morning and 10, the swing shift, for all of Bellingham, what I hear when I go out to neighborhoods is that they don't necessarily feel real safe, or they don't know their that they're going to get response time, when they want it. And so I think we need to make sure that we're not just looking at statistics about why the crime rate goes down. I sat with Sheriff Elfo when he made a presentation on the Sheriff's Department at my Birchwood neighborhood meeting last night. And he said sometimes the crime rate goes down because we can't process people, or we can't actually arrest the people we need to arrest. So we need to make sure we know exactly what we're talking about when we talk about crime rate. And I think that obviously safe neighborhoods is one of the core services that people in the community expect. In fact, they expect it so much they don't even notice until it's not there.
Thank you. I think we have a question here.
This is a single issue question, and it's something I'm directing to Mayor Pike because it's something you could do something about right away, but I'd also like to ask the other candidates to address it. In north of us, British Columbia, quite a conservative government they have. They will this year initiate a complete ban on cosmetic herbicides in British Columbia. And right now, the city parks department is still using cosmetic herbicides in city parks, including on Lake Whatcom at Blodell Donovan. So I would like to know, A, what your opinion is on you could stop the city using it in the parks right away, and then what the process would be for getting that in front of people, getting people figuring out how that can be done throughout the city and hopefully throughout the whole watershed on Lake Whatcom.
Thank you.
First, let me say that the only herbicide that I'm aware that we use in the watershed in our park is an injected herbicide for Japanese knotweed, which is almost impossible to get rid of otherwise. So that's the only herbicide that I believe we're using. If we're using anything else, it's contrary to what policy is. So I will check into that, and I will work to make sure we're not doing that. And the knotweed is a real problem, and so until we find some other solution, and I will say it's that they're following very strict protocols, being environmentally sensitive with the knotweed. There's difference of opinion on that, but that's one where I try not to be too much of an expert over staff that know a heck of a lot more than I do on some of those issues. So.
They're not, I swear I've seen that distinctive yellow strip dead in city parks, not in the watershed,
Right.
but in other city parks.
In other cities' parks, I don't know, and I will check into that. But I know that we've had this discussion, and actually we've had it in open council meetings about the use of herbicides in Blodell particularly, and the not using those. And knotweed is the only exception I recall.
Clayton or Kelli, you have a response?
Well, I mean, I think the best thing we can do is depend on native plants so that we don't need a bunch of cosmetic additives, to use. But I think noxious weeds and invasive species are something else, and I don't think that you were considering that a cosmetic application, or were you?
I don't think we're going to use it in the watershed.
Yeah.
Clayton?
I don't either.
Good.
And it doesn't sound like the city believes that they should, and I don't think they are in the watershed. There's some places where maybe they just don't have enough time to take care of the property that aren't, areas that aren't in the watershed where it might be okay to use some Roundup as safely.
All right, let's move on. Skip?
Okay. Hi, I'm Dan Rass. I'm a City Club member. I have a question for all three panelists. We all know that it's been hard times, and we also know that one of the greatest assets that the city has is our friends and neighbors who serve us as city employees. Dan, you've alluded to the good deals that you have cut from certainly your point of view with some of the unions, but we know that none of the employees of the city or in the city of residents like reductions in staff, reductions in service, reductions in hours. So with that, going forward for all three of you, Dan, do you have plans to change your negotiations with exempt and non-exempt employees? If so, what? And Clayton and Kelli, do you have plans and/or things you would do differently or the same as Dan has been doing?
You understand that?
Yeah, I will say I will continue working and having conversations with the full breadth of our represented groups. I'm not sure how much I can say except that we have good communication, and I intend to continue having good communication about what the challenges are in front of us and what the opportunities we have to address those challenges are. Certainly, I think our most important asset as the government is the people working in the government. And I've been very troubled at seeing a willingness to cut as opposed to cut staff as opposed to work with staff and find ways to affect savings through contracts that at the end of the day, 3 years from now, we'll be in a different situation and people will still have jobs. So that's what I'd like to find ways to continue doing, and that's what we have done to some extent. We have had to do some cuts as well. Mostly it's been through attrition, but there's been some layoffs as well. I think that we're through that, but I can't even guarantee that. But I will say that we've done a good job. We've always maintained our reserves at above the council mandated levels. At the end of last year, we had reserves that were greater than the city of Seattle's in nominal terms. And so we've been managing prudently, and we will continue to do that while trying to maintain a reasonably sized workforce to provide the services this community wants. And at some point, I'm also not afraid of going to the taxpayers and saying, we're facing some really tough choices. Would you like to keep the employees that we have, or would you like to, do you want to and add perhaps a small incremental burden, or would you rather face a further loss of services? Because those are the kinds of choices that we're facing in these times, and I think people should have that conversation openly.
All right, Clayton and Kelli, if you have a response.
Well, I think Mr. Pike has done. He's had to make cuts. From what the people that I've spoken with have told me, it hasn't always been a very good open door communication style, and a lot of people don't feel like they've been treated fairly or listened to as far as options that they've attempted to present for saving money. I would always want to hear what the employees have to say as far as ideas that they can come up with to when there's necessary cuts on ways that the city could cut costs. And I'm not really here to attack his style, so I'm going to stop there.
Good job. Okay. Well, I've negotiated contracts before, though I don't think that would be my direct job if I was mayor. Somebody else would probably be doing that. But I do believe that we have cut across the board as much as we possibly can. So we first need to determine what services we're going to provide. We're going to decide how we're going to provide them, in partnerships, in hiring employees, whatever it is. And then we treat the people that are hired by the city and in a way that shows that they're valued as we do value them. I think that's really important. So across the board cuts we've used for quite a few years now, they're not going to continue to work. It is great to negotiate with employees about how they can be part of the solution. And when I was a freshman legislator, we passed a bill with Ralph Monroe called the Teamwork Incentive Bill. And it was an incentive for the people that were doing the jobs to come up with innovative ideas that would save money and provide better service. And really nobody knows that a lot better than the people that are providing the service. So that would be something that I would like to institute in the city, is this same kind of program to use the creative ideas and energy of employees to do that. But across the board cuts, are just going to make sure that we don't do any of our services well.
Okay, thank you. We have time.
Can I just
Sorry,
wanted to
Dan, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just need to respond a little bit to what Clayton was saying, which
Sure.
is implying that I don't have an open door policy with communication on these issues. And in fact, I have. There's all kinds of parameters around how you can communicate with represented groups. So I will acknowledge that there are some challenges there. But I've had a lot of communication. I will also acknowledge that in challenging times, when you have to make tough decisions, people are sometimes unhappy. And I certainly have made decisions. I haven't shied away from that. That's part of what your job is. You don't get to just do the fun parts of a job when you're in a job like this. So I think that I have had a very good communication with staff overall. And I think that we're bearing the fruits of that in the agreements that we're getting.
Just one quick response also, and that is, I don't make many promises, but I do promise that within the first 6 months, if I am elected mayor, I will visit every single department and I will shake every employee's hand.
We have a brief amount of time, so please, quick question.
Hi, my name is Reed De Silva. This is for Kelli, Clayton, and Mayor Pike can chime in if he wants, but I know his stance on it already. The American Traffic Solutions, the red light cameras, cash cow, basically. I'm very afraid. I don't
Your
really
question
want
is
those.
what?
What is your stance on that, Kelli and Clayton? After the 1 year, it's basically a pilot program, and then we can remove them if we want. Obviously, we'll have to see how they work out, but what's your stance on these red light cameras?
I don't support them. I think the studies that I've done on them show that while they may improve safety in some areas, I think increased patrol could do the same thing. And many of the cases get thrown out in court because you can't demonstrate who was actually driving the car. I think the city was premature in passing an ordinance that says we're going to do a pilot project before we know if they're even legal without a public vote.
Clayton, do you have a comment?
Sure. There's been a lot of talk about that issue, obviously, and so I've spoken with a great number of people. There's a lot of differing opinions on it, but what I don't agree with is the way that it was done. The public didn't have their hearing. The contract was signed before the initiative, which gives the Mayor Pike has said that he won't put city resources into fighting the initiative if it says no. But by signing the contract, he's given ATS a reason to fight it, which is the contract.
Okay.
The contract shouldn't have been signed until
Thank you. I'm
afterwards.
sorry to hurry up, but we do have a little bit of time. Dan?
Any proposed contract, there's always a potential for somebody to put an initiative out. You don't operate on what might happen, you operate on the world that you live in. I believe that in a time when we are fiscally challenged, when both of my opponents are saying we should maybe look at adding police, that we should be looking at having those costs incurred by the folks that are causing those increased costs. And that's exactly what traffic cameras do. They also increase safety. When I was on Bike to School Day, I rode with 7 kids and 2 other adults. We were crossing in a crosswalk in Old Fairhaven Parkway. 6 cars went right through the crosswalk. One of them almost hit a child. We can't have officers. First of all, officers don't pencil out on a ticket basis because, unlike cameras, an officer pulls over and everybody else that goes by doesn't get cited. And so the reality is this allows a more efficient use of our resources. It's something we worked with the police department to determine if it made sense or not. It was a program that the legislature said you can do this, and then after we had started going through the process, then some legislators started saying, well, maybe we think you shouldn't, without even talking to us. But I think that it's something that is proven to enhance safety. It's not quite the cash cow that people think it is, but it will in fact enhance safety. You know, I did a lot of transportation planning and research in my past. I looked at the studies, and it saves about an average of $50,000 to $60,000 per intersection in terms of injuries and property damage every place there's a camera. And I'm particularly concerned about increasing the safety in school zones. because the most dangerous thing for kids walking to school, and we should want them walking to school, we've got an obesity epidemic going on where kids aren't getting enough activity. The most dangerous thing for a child walking to school, if they're in elementary school, it's their friends' parents driving to school and not paying attention. People pay more attention when they know that they can get caught. That's the bottom line.
All right, thank you. On that note, I really want to thank the three guests, panelists, today for joining us. And to give them a book called Welcome Places 2.
Wait,
So-
I give that book away. You can't.
Yeah. So thank you very much for coming, and we'll hope to see you next month.